What exactly is a true calling and how on earth do we find it? Join me, Annabelle Beckwith, as I speak to numerous women who are on that very journey and from whom we can all learn how to find our own true calling. Hello and welcome to True Calling. The theme for today's show is building your tribe, and my guest, Christine Esson, along with her co-founder Russell Dalgleish, have over the last few years built the Scottish Business Network, a global network of people with associations with and affiliations to Scotland. The network now spans dozens of countries, has thousands of members, and is a genuine community, but it certainly didn't start like that. It started one rainy day in London with an idea. Let's hear Christine's story. So, Christine, welcome to the show. Welcome to True Calling. Delighted to have you here. Now, Christine, you are a co-founder of the Scottish Business Network, which now spans the entire planet, does it not? The Scottish diaspora. Scots are everywhere, basically, but it didn't start like that. And the theme of our show this episode is very much around finding your tribe and building a community, which is absolutely what you've done here. How did it start? What led up to you forming the Scottish Business Network?
Well, first of all, thank you, Annabelle, for welcoming me to this discussion. And it's great to be interviewed by somebody who is part of the community and such a strong advocate for it. I would love to say there's some sort of glamorous and, fabulous starting point of SBN. But it started, and I'm going to use a Scottish phrase here, dreich. It started in a very dreich, that's a grey and dismal day in London, and I had been invited by a Scottish lawyer, a chap who was Glasgow based but was doing work in London, as so often our financial and legal services do, and he contacted me because we'd met informally at a whisky tasting event in London, and I was a recent recruit to London, so I was literally going to the opening of an envelope in order to find, as you said, my tribe, because there I was, I'm a city girl, I'm a Glasgow girl, but I had relatively recently arrived in London, so I was looking for that support and that network. So got this invite to Cafe Nero in Tottenham Court Road in London. And if you know anything about me, Annabelle, I don't drink tea or coffee, I only drink hot water. So there was a bit of a negative start for me, but I thought, I'll go along because I've been asked. And I went along, and never let the truth, as my father would say, get in the way of a good story. I entered Cafe Nero in a rather dreich morning, and I'd been told there was a number of Scots like myself who were working in London were going to be there. And I scoured the cafe for them, Annabelle, and there in a corner were like 3 or 4 of them currying in the corner. And I just thought, is this it? Ooh. Because, as I say, the night before, I'd likely have been to an event with the Irish diaspora, because at that time I was working for an organisation called Enterprise Ireland, who are the Irish Trade and Investment Board. And I could likely have been at an event with the Irish ambassador. It would have taken me at least half an hour to get up the stairs to be welcomed by the ambassador at that time, the wonderful Dan Mulhall, and his wife Greta. And I would have had to squeeze my way through, because that room would have been packed through of the Irish diaspora. But here I was meeting the Scottish, or, the Glasgow diaspora in London. There was just a few of us in the corner. But one of the people who was there was this gentleman called Russell Dalgleish. And I said to him, I said, really, could we not do a bit better here if this is bringing, to use your phrase, a community, a tribe together? is this the best that we can do? And I started talking about my experience of working with the Irish diaspora, of introducing Irish entrepreneurs to the diaspora, primarily in London, but across the UK, and how engaged they were to hear about the stories, maybe from their university, their college, or their hometown. Would it not be something that we in Scotland could replicate? And when I said this, a light went on with Russell. And he said, this is really interesting. He said, because I've commuted, for nearly 20 years, and I've long felt there was something we should be doing to engage those Scots like myself with the great entrepreneurial activity that's happening in Scotland. So from that somewhat unassuming start, it was great because I met somebody who had quite a different skill set to me. That was Russell. My background as I'm an accountant, I'm economic development generalist, but we both had a skill set and we both had our own communities and an understanding of how they operated, Annabelle, that we were able to bring together. So that was the starting point, a coffee shop in Tottenham Court Road, but an idea there that we decided to develop.
How interesting. And isn't it, it's almost a cliche, isn't it? From these small acorns, mighty oak trees grow. Now, as you've said, I'm a member of the Scottish Business Network, but just for our viewers who are thinking, what? How would you describe the Scottish Business Network at the moment? Because this is obviously the thing that you and Russell have built. It's a useful metaphor, I think, for anybody who's wanting to build a community and a tribe and really reach out in the way that you have done and continue to do. But for anyone who's going, what is it? How would you describe it?
Simple terms. We're here to support Scottish entrepreneurs, Scottish organisations who have the ambition, the passion and the commitment to go global. And what we do is we help them focus on what it is, the support that they are needing to go global. We coin it as, what is your laser focused ask? And the laser focused ask is then of Scots around the world. So born in Scotland, or many of whom just have a strong affinity to Scotland, many of whom have worked for Scottish companies or have studied here in Scotland, and they have a strong tie to Scotland. And what they want to do is to use their global understanding of what it means to operate in a market in Singapore, in LA, in Auckland, New Zealand, what it is you need from a cultural understanding to operate in these markets. And we, as members of Scottish Business Network, part of the Scottish community, will help you with that. So what is your laser focused ask? And I, being Fiona in Auckland or Jamie in Singapore, I will help you take that further forward.
It's fantastic. And this is the thing, is like, you don't think, oh, I'm not Scottish, so that's me then, because there are members who, as Christina said, have an affinity with Scotland. Some of them have Scottish parents or grandparents or even Scottish ancestry. Maybe they came here on holiday and liked it. It's just a willingness or a want to be part of that Scottish infrastructure, that Scottish diaspora that's spread all over the world. And it's an interesting thing, Christine, isn't it? Because if you look at Scotland on the map, if you had a globe, you'd be getting a pin and be hard pushed to kind of poke it into Scotland, isn't it? And yet, as I said, Scots are everywhere. And actually, in terms of business and entrepreneurship, the Scottish legacy historically has been quite remarkable. We punch above our weight. Now, given this, here you are in a coffee shop in London, huddled in a corner to shelter from the rain more than anything else, thinking, is this it? Two, as you describe, we have somebody in Auckland, somebody in Kuala Lumpur, somebody. How did it go from the coffee shop in Tottenham Court Road to the network that you have now? Because you and Russell had a really clear vision as to what you wanted this to be. Heaven knows there's enough networking groups and so on, online and offline, where you just stick your name on a list and you might get an email from time to time, but there isn't the sense of community that we have and that you and Russell have built up within the network. So how did it start to, how did you start to get the ball rolling?
There's some, key points, I would say, Annabelle, where I could see that shift in the organisation. We were very, very fortunate at the start to, I always say to people who are looking to make an influence or make a difference, get to the centre of a spider's web. And what we were able to do kind of incidentally in London was get to a few of the sort of hubs of where Scots were congregating. We were really, really fortunate that our first meeting, of which I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to 26 people. And the reason I wrote a letter, Annabelle, how often in life do you receive a letter nowadays?
Well,
apart from telling you what your tax return is going to be, or what a debt is outstanding. How often do you get a letter? So I wrote a letter. I actually sat down and wrote a letter to 26 Scots that I'd identified in London. I got a response from 24 of them, and 22 turned up, as was then Aberdeen Asset, now Aberdeen, at their offices in Bread Street in London, because the founder of Aberdeen Asset, Martin Gilbert, he heard about what we were doing. We had a connection in there. And Martin stood up. I think a lot of people came because you'd want to hear from Martin Gilbert, global asset manager, leader in his field. So probably most of them turned up because it was an opportunity to connect with him. But they turned up, and I'll never forget, this is a way back in 2016. And Martin Gilbert, it was a January night, and he said, yes, we have a very successful business here. But I can tell you now, as I came down from Aberdeen to London a good number of years ago, had there been, and he did use the word community, he said, had there been a community like what Scottish Business Network is seeking to achieve, I would have been part of it. And so that gave us an endorsement that the idea that Russell and I had, there was something in it. If somebody as credible and as influential in the City of London as Martin Gilbert is and was stating that, then that gave us a real oomph. And we'd one or two people in that initial audience. And as I say, it was purely by looking at LinkedIn. Had they been to university in Scotland? Were they working for a Scottish company? Could I see links to Scotland and now being London-based that gave me that route? But what I then got was a route through other groups, because a number of other groups were there in London. But unless you were a lawyer, a Scottish lawyer, or a Scottish accountant, or played golf or rugby, there wasn't that cross-sectoral, non-sporting or non-affiliation group, as you've talked about. So we got to the heart of those groups very quickly, and word soon spread. If you want to hear about great entrepreneurial activity that's happening in Scotland and hear it direct from the Scottish entrepreneurs, then come to this group. Come and see us. So we did it regularly. It was the third Tuesday in every month. We started being welcomed by a great number of very credible businesses in London who were really keen to have us there. And so we started growing because we were bringing the stories of fantastic entrepreneurial activity. We were telling the story of Claire Campbell, the first woman to own a weaving mill in the Highlands of Scotland. We were telling the story of Jamie McGowan, who, you were talking about Scotland being a small place. He's in the Isle of Harris. So he's in an island off Europe,
Yeah.
And yet he is exporting globally.
Yeah.
And these Scots who had a strong affinity to Scotland, but usually were only going back home to Scotland to meet the family, etc., they were then hearing about people like themselves who needed support. more often than not, it's introductions or advice of how to work in that market. So that small group started expanding primarily through word of mouth. But where the global shift and the global community came in, Annabelle, was when there is a document called A Trading Nation, published in 2017 and refreshed subsequently. And what it states is about Scotland seeking to go global with our exports. We have 346,000 Scottish companies, but 100 of those companies make up 60% of Scottish exports. Mm-hmm. So this was talking about how Scotland wanted to increase its entrepreneurial activity, but yet nobody had ever asked Scots around the world, what do you think of Scotland as an exporting nation? Where do you see the barriers of Scots who are exporting? So Russell and I, again, just through our own connections, etc., reached out. Again, we used LinkedIn, we used different groups. We reached out with a survey that we did jointly with an organisation called Momentous Change. Roger Mullen and Michelle Thompson helped us pull together the questions there. We went out to significant number of people, and we got a 75% success rate in return on those. And the responses were from a greater number of people than we have Global Scots, and Global Scots is a government-supported organisation for Scottish diaspora. So we get responses literally from all around the world. But what those responses also gave us was the building up of a community, because this community had never been asked. They'd never asked Scots in South Africa, in Finland, in Hong Kong, what do you think of Scotland as a trading nation? And to be able to share that information then increased the community, because they were being asked. They were being asked their advice and their input. So that's what put us onto the global stage, because those people that we reached out to said, I'm really interested in being asked that question. I'd like to be involved more. Or how can I become more involved? So that was the next step, which brought us to the global size that we have now, purely by asking a question.
Purely by asking a question. And I think there's just to kind of rewind a little bit right to the very beginning of that, when you said that you wrote a letter to people. And I think that's really telling. It's almost like that the vision and the culture, if you will, and the whole ethos of what you were doing, for me, is summed up in that sentence, Christine, because it's not like we've sent out a mass email, we did a publicity campaign. It was like, I sat down, I got a pen and some paper, I wrote them a letter. Because, and as you say, it's a very personal thing to do, isn't it? The only mail I get through my door, as you say, is something from the tax office or somebody selling double glazing or something. We don't tend to get that sort of letter anymore. So it's going to A, attract people's attention, and B, it is a point of genuine connection. And that as a theme for within the network clearly was continued when you said, we're going to ask the question. We're not going to make assumptions. We're going to reach out and ask the question. And it's the way you're describing it now, it seems almost like there was such a gap there. It's almost as if the time was like everything was ready for you to say, here we are, and everyone's going, yes, oh, thank goodness, finally somebody is pulling this is pulling this together. So in terms of, given that the kind of theme of the show is true calling, how does the way that you and Russell have built the network, and it's gone from, as I will keep repeating because it's such a remarkable story, a few of you huddled out in the rain in a coffee shop, to the global network of how many members is it now? How many different countries?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think we've got membership in certainly close to 30, if not more, countries around the world. But online, our connections between Russell and I go to close to 15 to 20,000. Yeah.
So there we have it. And it's So it's grown in this huge way, and yet there is still a community. But how does this feed into your personal purpose and calling, Christine? Because clearly this is something that, having witnessed what the Irish were doing so well, and thinking, how has it played out in terms of you following your own aspirations, and bringing it about?
I think, for me, as you and I have spoken about previously, Annabelle, my background is economic development. It doesn't sound the most exciting thing in the world, but every day I am talking to companies who have, as I go back to that ambition, that passion and commitment to take their products, take their services, and take them into a wider market. And I have the pleasure of speaking to entrepreneurs, or sometimes, some of Scotland's oldest organisations, and talking to them about their growth plans. But I've also been at the other end of it, and nothing has broken my heart more than having to stand there in front of business individuals and employees who have worked for several generations in a company, to be standing there to be told this company is folding because the global market is no longer there, or the price hikes, etc., mean that we can no longer continue trading. And there is nothing more leveling than that. And I can remember one time in particular, and it was an organisation in Alloa, who had been there, generations had worked in this textile business, and having to stand there as their employer was telling them, we will be shutting our doors. That is heartbreaking, Annabelle. That really is. And that, for me, is why I am so passionate about seeing how we can retain businesses in communities, because it is a community that builds a business. Communities around it can help develop it, but it's a community, and often, the physical location of a business makes all the difference. That's what ties people to a location. And I can still remember leaving that place. I was fine. I jumped into my car. I was driving back to my office. My job was secure, but I actually genuinely had to pull over, because I just thought, these people are going home tonight and saying they've no longer got a job. And that, for me, is heartbreaking. So where does it come from me? It comes from me because I'm passionate about Scotland. I'm passionate about the entrepreneurial activity that we achieve. And I'm passionate about retaining these businesses in Scotland and taking them global, not just to other Scots around the world, but to other locations, to other businesses, to show about the great entrepreneurial activity here in Scotland. I hope, does that give you a sense of why I'm doing it, Annabelle?
It does. And I love what you say about, as you say, when you say economic regeneration, it sounds like some big, huge thing that is solely to do with government policy and employment figures and so forth. But which only to an extent it is. It's actually about those individuals who are working within those businesses, the entrepreneurs who are showing up day after day, grafting away, to provide for themselves, to create a working environment for their employees and so forth, and everyone in between. And you've so many times during our conversation, you've used the word community, and I think that for me, that's certainly one of the reasons why I'm a member of the Scottish Business Network and continue to be so, is because it genuinely is like a community. It's not just a network where you showboat a little bit, or you might hear from time to time, and it's also one of those things where I would say, as part of your ethos, you and Russell, and indeed all of those who are ambassadors around the world, genuinely want to help people. It's not about, right, let's sell something, let's grow our membership so we can sell them something. It's not. The heart of the whole thing is, let's help people succeed. People who are linked to Scotland or in Scotland or have an association with Scotland, help them to succeed. And I have to say, every time over the years, I'm sure sometimes I've been a nuisance, but every time I've messaged you or Russell and said, do you know anyone in, very, very quickly, it's like, oh, you need to speak to, or let me put you in touch with, because there is a genuine endeavour in building that community. And I would also say on that point, Christine, is that you and Russell, as part of the culture of this community, are very, very giving and not egotistical. It's not like it's my network and I'm at the. It's very much about being in service to the community. That's something that I see in you both, and that's something that I admire in you both and appreciate about the network. Is that spirit. So very much testament to your personalities and what you've built.
Thank you, Annabelle. And I think, you know, we haven't always made friends along the way with this, Annabelle. I mean, I'm quite clear. It's particularly in the early days of saying no to people. And, you know, if people, we would have conversations of when folk were looking to join, because we have started with a membership model. We're most definitely reviewing that, Annabelle, in light of, you know, current circumstances, because, you know, is the membership, paid membership, really what we're about? No, we're about a wider community than that. But I would say to people at the start, and you could very quickly get a sense of if they were just coming there with that business card in order to, oh, I'm Christine, here's my business card, buy from me. We've all been there, Annabelle. It's painful. It's utterly painful. And so I would say to people, if that's what you're looking for, we're not the organisation for you. We're not the community for you. But there's plenty of other great communities that will support you in that. However, by coming into the room on that third Tuesday in the month and sitting there, be it at Shepherd and Wedderburn, Aberdeen Asset, as it was Silicon Valley Bank, who were great supporters of us, sitting there and listening to that story and then hearing the laser-focused ask, you have made a commitment, and your commitment is, A, that you're going to listen, but B, if you can support and if you can make that connection, then we would ask you to do so. So that's quite a commitment for an individual, because you and I very well understand, Annabelle, that our reputation is based very much on how other people present us, or, you know, who go through us for those business connections. If they let us down, then it's our reputation that suffers. So I think in building this community, and it's so generous of you to feed that back to Russell and I, is that, well, let's just get some ground rules sorted, which is, this is not about selling, this is not about buying, it's about building a relationship, and here's how we start it. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christine. And I think that's a fitting place to conclude. It is about building relationships and building lasting connections, because that's what matters at the end, isn't it? Yeah, that's what really does bring about that genuine connection. Christine Esson, thank you so much for joining us on True Calling. If anybody watching is thinking, hang on, did I not have a great uncle who was from Dundee or something? Where can we find you? Sure, please go on to us. We're in all social media links, but our website is all the W's, sbn.scot, and .scot might be a domain name you might be interested in. So check out the .scot domain name. One of our members there, and Harry McGrath, has developed that. Russell and I are great supporters and developers through LinkedIn, so reach out to us on LinkedIn, but the main information you'll find out is in all the W's, sbn.scot, and please sign up for our weekly newsletter, where you will hear all the stories of great Scottish entrepreneurs and more. Brilliant. Christine, thank you so much for joining us today. You're very welcome. Thank you, Annabelle. So, as we've seen, Christine's journey started with an idea that she and Russell wanted to develop. And it started with her looking around her and thinking, surely we can do better than this. And that, together with personal drive and a personal touch, is what has led to the network today. I think it's also worth noticing that her and Russell's focus isn't just on building a network so that they can benefit from it. It's very much about building a network and building a community, forging genuine relationships from which everybody can benefit. There's something in that about our true calling not just being about what we can gain for ourselves,
but being in the service of other people. Friends, whatever you do today, choose to take steps in the direction of your true calling.